Welcome, everyone. We are so excited. We have our friend, Pastor Miles McPherson, here, and he's the author of a brand new book called The Third Option, Hope for a Racially Divided Nation. And we call this week Racism and the Brain. And let me tell you a little bit about Pastor McPherson. He was born in Brooklyn, New York, the second oldest of 5 children, raised on Long Island. Was a professional football player. In fact, that's how we met. He's part of our NFL study. He went to the University of New Haven. He majored in engineering. That's actually very important, right? And very unusual for a football player.
Well, they keep things major, not graduate. So
achieved All-American honors in football, drafted into the NFL. Strong athletics run in his family. His brother, Don McPherson, was the Heisman Trophy runner-up in 1987. Played in the NFL for 4 years, was part of the San Diego Chargers, which, oh my goodness, I've seen so many Chargers who had drug addiction problems. And he developed an addiction to cocaine that put him into a tailspin. After a second season in the NFL, after a week-long drug binge, he called out to Jesus Christ, accepted him, and stopped doing drugs in one day.
Amazing.
I used to work with Teen Challenge. In fact, that's how that was part of my journey back to the Lord, was working with them. So I get that. I've heard that.
Yeah.
He worked as a youth pastor for Horizon Christian Fellowship in San Diego, enrolled in Azusa Pacific University, got his Master's of Divinity degree. And in 2000, he felt called by God to start the Rock Church in San Diego, which according to Outreach Magazine has been consistently one of the nation's fastest growing and largest churches, with nearly 15,000 people attending one of the Rock's 21 Sunday services, which I got to speak at a few weeks ago. I was so excited. In addition, it's streamed online, microsites, which you have to talk to us about microsites. It's so interesting. Radio and TV. And he's done so many other things, but he's the author of this very important new book called The Third Option. So welcome to the Brain Warriors Way
interesting
podcast.
Bio.
Hey, I'm tired of listening to that.
No, and I like it because you relate to our audience in so many different ways. Mm-hmm. You know, the NFL and coming and joining our study, the addiction issues. I mean, it's and now the racial issues, and I think that's amazing. We can sort of address, things that you understand.
I've been there, done that.
That's great.
So before we get into the third option, I want to start by talking about your thoughts on how we got this way. Why are we racially, politically divided in such a nasty way?
Our nature, our sinful nature is all about me. And one of the best ways and most common, easiest ways to divide is how we look. People who look like me, I feel like I have something in common. And I'm going back to way before slavery in this country, just in general.
Almost biology. It's just sort of a...
And we're selfish. So, people like me are better than people like you. And I think at the root of it, when we get into this book, when we think about what we feel about people like me and people not like me, we divide based on that. And I think at the root of it, we can trace it back to that and part of our sinful nature.
Very interesting.
And people who are not like me scare me.
Right.
And so there's probably something in our genes that say, watch out, be careful.
Yeah, I mean, you could speak to the genetic part way better than me, but exactly, the people who are, and I write this about in the book about how we group, we're all part of groups. And the group that I'm part of, my in-group, those are people like me that I understand very well. I'm accustomed to them. I'm comfortable with them.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I actually did, I wrote about part of that in one of the books I wrote. We are hardwired to do that, to group like that for safety reasons. Mm-hmm. So before we lived in a society that was civilized, right? That was our survival. Survival meant you grouped. You had to be a part of a group. And if you were part of that group, it meant other groups were automatically your enemy.
And you didn't know about that group, so you had anecdotal information, what you saw on the television or one experience, and then you apply all that to that whole group.
Right.
And then you label them. And so now that's who they are. They're in that corner. I'm in this corner. And so it's a us versus them mentality, which is what we see today. The third option is that we honor what we have in common. We'll get to that later.
See that? And that actually, I love this because I have said this so many times, and I ended up feeling really stupid with one of my friends, a dear friend of mine who's African American. And I was like, I don't get it. We're all Americans first.
Right.
And I'm having a hard time. Like, it can't be this bad still in this day and age. And she got a little irritated with me. And I'm like, yeah, that was probably a really ignorant thing to say. I have no business commenting on how bad it is in certain neighborhoods because I've got no idea.
Yeah.
But to many of us, it feels like because where we live is safe and clean and, whatever, we can't imagine that it still goes on because we wouldn't do it.
Yes, or you don't realize what you do. I think
and that's good.
And that's the
I
other
like
thing.
that.
And that's the other thing. One of the big ahas in this whole book was getting people to accept that they can be racially offensive without being a racist.
Everyone can.
Without being a racist.
Yeah.
So because people, if they associate being racially offensive to being a racist, then they deny that they could ever be offensive. So therefore they deny they could ever be wrong. Therefore they deny that what you're saying is bothering you doesn't exist. So it's a domino effect. But if I can be racially offensive without being a racist, in other words, I may offend you and it may not be me, it may be you.
Right.
Or I may be saying something that I really sincerely want to help.
But you don't realize.
Like saying I don't see color. I know people will mean well when they say that.
Right.
But they shouldn't say it.
But it's sort of silly, right?
Yeah, it's so silly.
Have you been to the Museum of Tolerance in LA? Oh, it's fantastic. I went to a Christian college and they took us as part of our nursing education because I'm a nurse from Loma Linda. And they took us there. It is amazing. It is an amazing museum. I've never seen a Holocaust museum quite like it. So it's very different. It was done in part by it's Leventhal, but it was also done by Steven Spielberg. So it's very interactive. But there's one part where there's two signs and you're walking through and it says, people who do not discriminate in this line, people who do discriminate in this line. Everyone tries to go through, most people try to go through the other side. The door won't open. The door won't open. It's locked.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, it was such a huge wake-up call because it makes you really stop and go, wait, do I do that? I discriminate every day against people who I think hurt children or who, but the minute you do that, it can spread. Right?
Go ahead.
What was your experience growing up?
Well, my grandmother's white. My other grandmothers have Chinese and black. My grandfather's a black.
You got all bases covered.
I got all bases covered. I'm all things to all people. And I grew up in a black neighborhood, and I went to school in a white neighborhood for the first 8 years of my schooling. So I got called all the names in the white neighborhood because I was black, but I got called names in my neighborhood because I wasn't black enough.
Right.
And so I was kind of like a no man's land growing up. And that was my experience is I was black, but to some I wasn't black enough. Even still to this day, I get joked about that. And got called all the names that, all the N-words and white boy and this and that, this and that. That was my experience. And
so you really felt it from both ends.
I got it from both ends, even though I am black and identify black and my best friends and family was black. But I had a white grandmother. And what was interesting about my grandmother is that I'm at home, there's all these brown people, light-skinned brown people, and this white lady, and we never knew we never knew as kids where she came from.
Oh, interesting.
We didn't know her family because when she married my grandfather,
they disowned her.
They disowned her, and they lived 15 minutes away. We found out later.
That's crazy.
So they sent her from Jamaica, West Indies, where she grew up, and she actually knew my other grandmother as a kid. They sent her to Jamaica, Queens, so she would marry a black Jamaican. And in Jamaica, Queens, she met a black Jamaican in Jamaica, Queens.
Oh,
and
my God.
And married my grandfather. So, but I grew up knowing people on both sides of the street, which the white neighborhood was on the other side of Ocean Avenue. And they were great kids, and I had great friends in both neighborhoods, and they talked about each other. But I knew both of them.
Isn't that interesting?
I said, no, what you're saying about them is not right.
Right.
You just know a little bit of information because the white kids never came into my neighborhood, and my friends never went into that neighborhood. And it was, it was right across the street. So, but I went back and forth every day from 1st to 8th grade going to school. But my friends in the white neighborhood would never come to my house.
That's fascinating.
When you were in the NFL, what was your experience with racism?
You know, certain positions, and it's changed over the years. Certain positions have had a stereotype of, like, white players would play quarterback. There was very few quarterbacks growing up. My brother was a Heisman runner-up. My brother was the #1 rated passer in college, but he was drafted in the 5th round, and there were a lot of stereotypes about, he couldn't pass, but he was the #1 passer in the nation. He was a Heisman runner-up. It's changed dramatically. Guys that now are getting opportunities because guys like him blazed a trail for him. I was a safety in the NFL, and safeties when I was growing up there were more white guys playing safety. And we were told things like, the athletes go in the corner and the smart guys go at safety. I was told that. And so that was very subtle, but you had, most of the coaches were white. And so, not that they were racist at all, but when I was told that as a stereotype, well, you're going to go over here because we have the smart guys that play this position. Now that's changed. You got a lot high degree of black players playing those positions, quarterback, safety as well. But that was probably the biggest, what my brother went through was the biggest glaring thing that was racist to me that I experienced.
So interesting. So I have a niece. She is half Hispanic, but she looks Hispanic. Well, if you saw her, she's experiencing what you just described, right? So she moved down here, and the school she goes to has a lot of Hispanic kids, and she thought she was going to feel comfortable there. And they make fun of her, and they don't really bring her into their fold, and they think she's a white girl. And I'm like, your name's Castellanos. I'm so confused. She speaks Spanish, you know what I mean?
Right.
But they won't accept her.
Yeah.
And so it's just an interesting, odd thing when you see this happen.
Well, we decide what does like me look like, and what does like me sound like, and what does like me do. Once we decide those barriers, then we exclude everyone else.
And exclusion is really going to hell, because hell, according to some theologians, is not a burning lake. It's separation from God and separation from your community, because when you become separated from your community, your life is at risk. And so that exclusion is so painful, as Alize, our niece,
and the white kids don't
experienced.
want her in their group either. Well, now they're accepting her because she's really smart, but so they're bringing her in based on her sort of IQ and genetics and whatever. And there's a very funny other thing, and this probably goes along to what you said earlier. You may not mean it in a negative way, but it comes across that way. So my daughter went to a school where there were very few African American or black kids. And when they came in, they were such a novelty, everybody wanted to be their friend. And my daughter, it actually irritated her. She's like, why do you do this thing where you need a token black friend? I'm so confused. Like, do you know that person? And it would bother her. And so her friends would call her racist. And she's like, no, I think they're racist. Like, in her mind, that felt racist to her. So what are your thoughts on that?
Every person, I was walking to a school once, into a inner city school to do an assembly, and it was black and Hispanic in the city of Philly, and the white youth pastor was walking with me, and he said, how do I act? And I said, number one, you can't act good enough to fool anybody. So,
right. So don't try.
Don't try. And number two, if you just yourself,
right,
everything will be fine, even if you're goofy. And so in situations like that, every individual has to, in their heart, sincerely say, I really want to get to know you.
Right.
Or I really respect you. And a lot of times we want to judge why someone's doing something, but sometimes people have a genuine interest in someone. And so it's okay. Sometimes people have a manipulative, undermined intent. It's hard to determine that. So every individual case is so different.
Yeah. It was an interesting thing.
Racism is common. It's painful.
I grew up with it.
It's painful.
And it was ugly.
It is pervasive. What do you do about it? Stay with us. We're going to talk about the third option.
Welcome back. We are still with Pastor Miles and McPherson, and we are talking about racism in the brain. And it's so interesting. This topic is actually fascinating because it really is, like, I've never seen our nation more divided than it is now, politically, racially. This, the blacks against cops. And I mean, it's really sad. At what point or how can we step back and go, look, we're Americans first. We're people first. How can we help each other? What will it take?
And Miles has a brand new book called The Third Option, Hope for a Racially Divided Nation. I've seen the YouTube talk you did on this. It's brilliant. And I love what you said about so many people go to Hawaii. They try to get brown skin.
Right.
They try to get
It's
dark
so
skin because
true.
they think they're going to get a date. And yet, if you're
Born that way.
you're
Weird.
criminalized.
Yeah, if you get a tan in Hawaii, it's beautiful and celebrated. If you get a tan in the womb, it's invalidated.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
That's a great expression.
To some, but you get the point. And when people say they don't see color in that illustration, when people say they don't see color, but when you get a tan, you want people to see that color. You do it so it is seen, but yet there are other colors you say you don't see. So anyway, you asked the question. This book is about honor, and in every race conversation is about us versus them. You have to pick a side of division that pits you against somebody, and this book is all about how do I honor what we have in common, which is the image of God. And as you know, we're 90-something% genetically exactly the same. We're more similar.
99.7.
Yeah, and I put 5, so I'm a little safe in here. 99.7% the same, but yet we focus on how we're
That
different.
0.3%.
Yeah,
Point
and even
0.3%. No, 0.3.
0.3, and even if that's the difference, I mean, that even some of that, even what really makes us look different is probably less than that. But this is talking about how has racism destroyed my ability to see you and honor you as a human being. Fear, culture, ignorance, blind spots, not understanding what love is, and how do I restore my ability to honor you and put a priceless value on you as a human being.
So what triggered you to write this book?
All my life, because I lived in 2 different worlds, and I was born in 1960, so I remember Martin Luther King and the struggle. And listen, when I was a little kid, we had black and white TV, and it was only white. There was very few black, little black on the black and white TV. And when someone black and white TV, we were glued. Like when Michael Jackson was going to come on TV, the world stopped. It was a big deal. So you grow up your whole life in that struggle, feeling inferior, feeling pushed down your whole life.
Isn't that interesting?
And so when
It'd be terrible.
went 3 years ago, when I got a chance to write a book, when I put a proposal in, I wrote one of the chapters on racism. It was going to be a book on other things, and race being one of them. And they said, "Would you write the whole book on it?" And I said, "Please, can I do that?" But I've always, every time I got an opportunity to preach on race because something happened in culture, or like when OJ was acquitted and the community the nation was divided,
Right.
I cried that night. Just the division broke my heart. It's like, man, and it's been a burden all my life. So when I got an opportunity to write it, I said, I want to write a book that's going to solve this, because my church is 20,000 people. We look like the United Nations every Sunday, and I see it every Sunday for 18 years.
It's awesome, though.
It's awesome, and people can get along. And so I wrote a book to try to provide people tools on how to get along.
I like
better,
that. I
how to
can't
be
wait to read
united.
it. It's really interesting.
And your church also has a lot of military people. And so I grew up in a very white San Fernando Valley, but I was Lebanese. And at a time
When it wasn't
the,
a good thing.
the Arab-Israeli wars were raging. And so I got singled out in a negative way. 1976, I won the California State Champion for peace oratory on our speech team, because I was arguing for a 2-state solution. But whenever I'd go to a tournament where there was a higher population of Jewish judges, they always flunked me. I came in 45th or something. So
I grew up with
experienced
that
it.
similar
but
thing.
where I really learned about integrating races was when I joined the military
that
in
interesting?
1972, because it didn't matter. You got promoted based on how you performed, not by the color.
But that
of your
hasn't
skin.
always been true in the military. That's
Oh,
not
no,
always been
it
true.
certainly wasn't true in World War I or World War II or the Civil War.
Yeah, I just don't want to address that because a lot of people are going to be
But now,
offended,
and I think you see that in your church, because there's a high military population in San Diego, is they're all over the board.
Yeah.
So what will it take for us to focus on someone's character more than their color?
Yeah, so this book is all about how to honor the other person, but it starts with honoring me
Okay.
and acknowledging that I'm made in the image of God, and the image of God in you is not inferior or superior to mine. I can acknowledge the image of God in you. I can acknowledge that you have character, that you have the ability to have a relationship with me, that you have dreams, you have pursuits, you have pain. I need to acknowledge and place a priceless value on my ability to have compassion for you, to understand you, to be patient with you. I have to start with me. What are my blind spots? What are my issues? How am I not seeing you? Because if I don't honor you, when I say honor you, place a priceless value on you, respect you, love you, I'm living below how I was designed to live. So that's on me. So the first thing to do is find out about me. The first 11 chapters of the 18 are all about me.
I like that.
It's divided by me, you, we. So the first 11 chapters are, what do I need to learn about my fears, my understanding what love is, my understanding of my blind spots, how am I offending people and not know it? So, and are there people in my life who are different than me that I can ask, am I being offensive? If all your viewers and listeners went to someone who was different, a Mexican, black, white person, and said, is there anything I say or do that's offensive? Doesn't make me a racist. I think we talked about in the first segment, you can be racially offensive without being a racist. Is there something I do? Ask your friends. Are there insensitive things I say?
Yeah, like what I said to my friend, Jasmine. So when I said that to her, it was offense. I could see her face. And I'm like, oh. Like, and I picked up on it. I was smart enough to pick up on, I'm commenting and acting like I know something I know nothing about because I don't think it should be that way.
Right.
But that's offensive to someone who has experienced something that's different from what I'm saying.
But it doesn't make you a racist.
No, I was,
Correct.
if anything, I was feeling the opposite. But
But that's it. That's such an important point.
I was feeling almost like
And
protected.
labeling, which are one of the ants that we talk about here all the time, the automatic negative thoughts, is so common in this conversation. If I can pigeonhole you, then I don't actually have to deal with you.
Exactly. The greatest commandment is to love my neighbor as myself. But if you're the other, you're not my group, you're not my neighbor, so I don't have to love you. And so if we think about all the people that you see on television that are different, think of the labels you put on them.
Oh, I do it every day.
Right?
I don't even deny that I'm judgmental. Like, but not against color. It's like,
I'm going to give this to you for free.
Yeah, no, but it's not, for me, it's not about color. It's about things you do in society. That, and I know I'm that way.
Right.
So I have to, like, you hurt a child. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, the death penalty in my mind is not a bad thing. So I just,
Well, which also
But
comes
that's
from
labeling, though,
past
right?
experience.
it does.
Of being hurt.
Right.
So often our buttons come from our history. And as we're going to talk about in the next podcast, it actually may not be our history. It may be the history of our parents or our grandparents, because things get transmitted more than just the color of your eyes and how tall you are.
Right. And if you think about the people we label, think about what you really know about them.
I don't. And I don't know what they've been through. They could have been hurt as a child. All I can think about in that moment is you did this to that person,
Right.
and that's unacceptable.
Or and you're talking about the child molesters. I'm talking about, whether they're Mexican, black, or white, and we think, okay, those people are like that, or that person is like that.
Well, and I grew up in a home where that was the norm.
Yeah.
So my stepfather, who was from Montana, and we used to get in some rip-roaring fights. So when I was little, I didn't know. You're just told this and you don't understand. And there were very few black people in my community, in my school. And I would hear that he was always telling racist jokes. And I didn't really know, right? But it never felt quite right, but I didn't really know the right, wrong part of it. It's like, it's how your family is, it's what you're told. And then all of a sudden one day I was like, wait, I experienced enough of the world. I'm like, this really feels yucky to me. It doesn't feel right. And I addressed it with him. We actually got into a huge fight over it. And because he was trying to tell me I'm wrong. And I'm like, I don't understand how you can be so racist. He goes, I'm not racist. I hate everybody the same. And I'm how is that okay? Like, I don't understand. You know what I mean? But we used
But
to
that
actually.
goes with the first 11 chapters of the third option. It's about him.
It's all about him.
I just
than
like,
it's about other.
but I grew
other
up with that,
people.
and it's toxic.
Oh, it is.
You have a lot of growing up to do when you leave home if you grow up in an environment like that, right?
Yeah.
You have to really do soul searching of your own.
And that's where this has to start. Again, without condemning myself, how can I be more honoring? It's not about avoiding being racist. It's about learning how to be more honoring. And those are two different things. Because people can walk on eggshells. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to do the wrong thing. That's a scary way to live.
But they can see that too. I feel like people see when you're not authentic.
Well, maybe not authentic, or if you're in fear, because I really don't want to offend.
Oh, okay.
That's okay.
That's more authentic,
Well, I say it's authentic, but it's not where you want to live. You want to live where, no, I am going to intentionally figure out how to honor you,
Right.
how to be able to speak life to you. And so instead of saying, okay, don't be racist, it's more about how do I honor? And this is
I
is
like
telling
that.
people
That's
how
a
to
very
be
different
more
perspective.
positive. Yeah, because if I come to you and I say, look, hey man, and you're different from me, and I'm like, hey, how you doing? And I ask people all the time where they're from. If you're sincere, people shouldn't be offended by that. I mean, the average person says, I appreciate you wanting to know about me,
Right.
versus being scared. Do I say this? Do I say that? It's like people say, do I say Black African American? Just be sincere.
Right.
I mean, even if
That is a good. I've actually always had that question. I'm not exactly sure.
in some parts of the country it's different. But if you're sincere, and you're just speaking, people are going to be okay, whatever.
Right.
But it's when you start walking on eggshells where you are stressed out. This is more about how do I be intentionally honoring versus avoiding saying the wrong thing.
Right. No, I
And
actually
so the
like
third
that.
option is, it goes from me to you
To
we.
honor. To honor. We, yes. Yes. The book is me, and then the second section is you, and the third section is we. Now, in every section, it talks about how I can honor. That's really the thread that goes.
I
through
really
everything,
like that.
How we can honor.
And I have a question because
And
this
that
is my
goes
own
with
question.
happiness. People don't know that when we're connected, we're happy. When we're disconnected, we're in fear and isolated. When we come back, we're going to talk about the brain and racism. Stay with us. All right, welcome back. So we're continuing with racism in the brain, and this podcast is going to be specifically about the brain and its role in racism. So a long time ago, I learned when I was looking at scans is that there are actually certain patterns in the brain that go with people who are rigid, who are inflexible, where if things don't go their way, they get upset. And then as we saw people who were clearly racist, we're like, oh my goodness, there's a pattern in the brain for this. And it's actually very similar to people who have OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, where they don't check locks, but they get a thought in their head. It has to be this way. And anything that's not this way, they can't stand it. They get upset by it. And so I saw it with people who are racist.
What about politics?
Well,
if you get stuck on,
we haven't talked about politics, but we absolutely should in this, because we are at such a political divide where if you really like what's going on in the White House and you say it, you get attacked. And if you don't like what's going on in the White House and you say it, other people attack you. I mean, the level of hostility is unlike anything I've ever seen. But there's a brain pattern that goes with it. Plus, with racism, you also, and I think you talk about it in the book, it goes from me to you to we. Well, what is we? It's empathy. It's I can relate to your experience. I can think about your experience. I can resonate with your experience. That's a brain function. It's the front third of your brain. It's called the prefrontal cortex, largest in humans. In any animal by far, it's 30% of the human brain. 11% of the chimpanzee brain, 7% of your dog's brain, 3% of your cat's brain. So this is the part of us.
That just made a lot of sense.
It's the part of us that makes us human. And the better that thing functions, the more connected you are, not just with your own tribe, but with other tribes as well. So when your brain's not right, you're not right. And so racism goes up. But you also see it in the church, given that you're a pastor. It's like, why are there so many churches? Because people get stuck on my way. Right. If it's not my way, then I can't stand it and I have to break off.
Wow.
Yeah, you mentioned a really interesting word too, and it'd be interesting to hear your perspective on this, tribe, because like I said before civilization, that's sort of how we survived. Mm-hmm. So trying to integrate tribes, if you think of it from that perspective, we separate. It's my curiosity is why we still do it, even though we know we don't know. I shouldn't say we should, but it feels like we should be more evolved, right? It feels like we should be more focused on character, and yet we still do the tribal thing. And when I was a nurse in the hospital,
tribes combine, they become more powerful.
Right.
They actually become safer when.
But they often have a hard time because of cultural differences too. Like there are differences in how they see things.
Yeah, and I have a chapter in here about culture, and usually we identify differences in culture for reasons to be different and separate. But all cultures are doing kind of the same things, just a little different. Like every culture has food.
Right.
Every culture has weddings.
They all want their children to be safe.
They want their children to be safe. They all want to pursue a job and a career, and people do it differently. And instead of saying mine's better than yours, what can I learn from your culture? And there was a guy I wrote about here. He's a 6'3" white guy, and he had a sales route in low income minority neighborhoods. And his coworker said, "Don't go; it's too dangerous." And he said, "Well, that's my route." So he started going, and every time he would get into a house, they wouldn't speak English, or it was all black, and he was out of place. He would always find something that they had in common.
That's smart.
He would look for a picture of maybe a kid playing baseball, or he'd ask for a glass of water.
That's brilliant.
And all of a sudden, they were united. And he sold insurance, but he made friends because we're all trying to do the same thing. And so it's all about how do we honor. This book is how can I honor your culture, the way you do things, and how can that make us stronger together?
I was watching one of the political fights one day, which makes me crazy. I just turn the news off most of the time. But it made me step back and go, wait, underneath it all, don't we mostly want the same things? Yes, we have some different values. But underneath even the value, the deepest you can go, we want safety, we want security, we want our kids to do well, we want to be happy, right? Underneath everything. But how people think that they should get there seems so radically different.
And there's a wild card to this that nobody talks about, and that's our genes and what experience does to our genes. So we know that children of the Holocaust, they actually have more problems with depression, with fear, with anxiety disorders, even though they didn't experience. And there's this great study out of Emory where they took mice and they made them afraid of the scent of cherry blossoms. So they shocked them every time the scent of cherry blossoms was in the air, and it's classical conditioning like Pavlov's dogs. But what the researchers found, that the babies of the mice that had been shocked were afraid of the scent of cherry blossoms. Their grandbabies were afraid of the scent of cherry blossoms. And so what happens in my grandparents' life actually affects me. And I have no idea.
Why?
So if you'd been robbed, raped in a fire, that actually may have generational consequences. And so I tell my patients it's important that we deal with whatever's yours. But if it's not yours, to try to understand that as well and begin to get you well, because that will affect your babies and your grandbabies. So we have a new granddaughter. Her name is Haven. She's gorgeous.
Of course.
See, baby can do anything and you think they're amazing.
But when Haven was born and when your daughter was born, little girls are born with all of the eggs they'll ever have.
It's amazing.
And their habits throughout their life turn on or off certain genes that make illness more or less likely in their babies and their grandbabies. So you see how important it is to get your health habits, your brain habits right, because it's not about you. It's literally about generations of you.
You know, one of the things I write about in this book, the third option, is about our social narrative and the role of our social narrative, the story that defines how we see the world. And you're adding a whole nother layer of the genetic social narrative, because it's one thing to grow up with your dad saying things and your friends saying things and the media telling you things.
Input directly.
And that's the only information you have. And then you have the genetic disposition to believe those things. And now you're really programmed to believe that this is the only way it is. And this is a deprogramming. This book is part of a deprogramming process and tool, so people can start to rethink how they see themselves and how they see other people and how they treat other people.
Well, think of the children growing up today in Syria with the ISIS crazies, the Americans involved, the Russians involved, the dictator, the chronic fear and hatred.
But we don't.
That is changing their genes, which is going to change generations. And that's why can't we solve, the Palestinian-Israeli thing? Because it's baked into their genes. And unless we really work hard to give the people the emotional, financial, physical support, we're not going to solve this.
And if we bring that closer to home, we've got people living in neighborhoods, right? I had this conversation actually with my niece. We were talking about, she has had a very chaotic, crazy life growing up. And so it's been really hard, and harder than most that I've dealt with. And we were talking about it, and she mentioned that when she sees a police officer, she instantly feels fear. And I'm like, why? I asked her why. And she couldn't sort of identify it. And then finally she said, because my dad's been arrested so many times, I've been in the back of police cars. And to me, that whenever I see a police officer, I'm like, but have they ever done anything to you? And she's like, no. And I'm like, but what was your dad doing when he got arrested? And she finally was able to sort of separate it and go, because I don't want her to feel like a victim. I want her to sort of take responsibility. And so we were able to talk about it. She's like, no, my dad was regularly breaking the law.
Into her mind.
But she was programmed, police are bad, don't ever say anything, never tell the truth, and never ask for help. That's what she was told, actually told growing up. That wasn't the indirect message. That's what she was told. And so it's funny. I'm like, that's so funny. When I see a police officer, I actually feel like, okay, everything's going to be okay. But a lot of it has to do with where you were raised and how you were raised. And when you talk about the issues in Syria, and I think about bringing that closer to home, we have people in neighborhoods who are terrified of the law because it has not served them in whatever way. So how do you fix that? Because that's carrying on generational
as well. So that's what we're going to talk about coming up is what to do. What can you do as an individual to combat racism in yourself and in your community?
Yeah.
Stay with us.
Because we've got to talk about communities and bringing them together.
Welcome back. We're talking about racism in the brain, and Pastor McPherson's new book, The Third Option, Hope for a Racially Divided Nation. You can get it on Amazon or at milesmcpherson.com. The Rock. How did they learn about The Rock?
SDRock.com.
SD
So
Rock.
for San Diego.
SanDiegoRock.com. They can watch services live.
It's amazing. I had the blessing of being able to speak at the services with Pastor McPherson a couple of weeks ago. But let's get really practical. All of us are affected by racism. What is it I can do as an individual to combat it in my life and in my world?
Yeah, I'd like to see it like community wide. What can you like? I know it starts with you, but then how do we extend it?
Yeah. Step number one is accept that I can be offensive without being a racist. One of the ways to look at third option is if you ask someone if they're racist, they'll say no.
Right.
Some will say yes, but the reality is a third option is we're all biased, and we all have less than neutral opinions about things, which is human. I need to learn about that. I need to accept that that's true and ask friends about my blind spots. One of the probably most practical things you can do is when you have a conversation with someone, every time you talk to a human, you are having a race conversation. I'm looking at you right now, and
race.
I'm guessing what I think you are.
Right, I like it.
Right, but a race conversation, it shouldn't be viewed as a race confrontation. It should be viewed as a race consultation. In other words, when I meet you, I should want to learn about you. And when you tell me you're Lebanese, and okay, now I want to know. And you told me about something, you hinted to what you are.
Right.
And I've been thinking of it since you said something about your background that I want to know what that is.
Right.
I should want to learn about you and allow you to self-disclose versus me impose on you my assumptions. Because my assumptions come from my social narrative, my flawed view, my genetics. It's wrong. It's incomplete at best. So if I every time I see someone, or even if I see someone on television that I may never meet, let me listen to what they're saying and believe them, and not call them a liar.
So give them the benefit of the doubt.
Give them the benefit of the doubt,
Or judge them.
exactly.
As bad.
Judge them as bad before I have a chance. You know, the NFL kneeling situation. Everybody has an opinion. You know, they shouldn't kneel. They should kneel. But I think let's step back, and a third option is to consider this.
Like
If I was laying in the street and you were driving down the street, the first thing I would hope you would say was, why are you laying in the street? Not get up because I got to get to work. And the guys in the NFL are 20-something-year-olds making a lot of money that can lose their job the next day and not get paid, some of them. They are risking a lot. Why?
Would they
Why?
do that?
Why would they do that? Now, you may in the end say, I don't agree with them kneeling. But before you say that, ask yourself why. These guys are not criminals. They're not knuckleheads. These guys they've worked hard. I was one of them. I know them personally. They are intelligent guys who are working in their communities, who are giving lots of money away, and they have pain. If they're really people like me, how can I honor them as a human? Because if that's a human, I know what it would take for me to risk everything. And would you risk that much money in that career? And the career is going to be this so long anyway, no matter what you do. So they have a short period of time to make money. So I think having conversations with people, giving people a chance to self-disclose their pain, their burden, their dreams before we impose our assumptions on them. If we just did that, and you went around and met people, go to the mall, meet somebody. Don't just say, oh, that's a black person, that's a white person, that's white privilege, that's black this, that's Hispanic, that's an immigrant. Spend time to listen to their story and put yourself in their shoes. There was a lady, when I was writing this book, she told me, why can't you just get over it? And I said, you need to be the other. And she's a very dear friend of mine, still to this day. And I said, you need to go someplace where you're the only white person. So in this book, I challenged 6 white people to do that and to answer certain questions about their experience. What they felt like when I asked them, what they felt like when they went there, how they were treated. What did they think was going to happen to them? And they all had great experiences. And nothing they feared happened. And I don't think any of them told me that what they feared had ever happened. And so I think we need to...
That's an interesting point. Their fears had never actually happened.
Never happened.
Well, that's so often true for my patients who have panic disorders. And say, come up with all these negative thoughts, as we're going to talk about next. They come up with all these awful, terrible things that's going to happen that mostly never happens.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So we can honor people by putting ourselves in their shoes, learning about what they really are. We can honor ourselves and our ability to love self-sacrificially and change by listening to our thoughts. What am I thinking about them? Where did I get that information? Why do I think that? I don't even know this person. I don't know why that person's angry. I don't know. That person, I was talking to a guy the other day, and his grandfather was killed by the Ku Klux Klan.
Mm-hmm.
His great-great-grandfather was a slave. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine having that history?
Yeah.
And so he's a man of God, and but we have to give people a chance to self-disclose to us what they feel and educate us, and they should be also gracious to let you educate them.
Mm-hmm. I actually really like that. That's really
So
interesting.
if we look at me, I don't have to label myself as a racist, but I am racially biased.
All of us are.
All of us. Are.
Everyone.
And so just own it.
Own it.
Right. John 8:32. Know the truth.
Own it.
And the truth will set you free. For you, it's I need to know about you as opposed to label you, which is to lump you with all of the Mexicans I've ever known and go, you're this way, to actually know you, not just the color of you. And we can put this together.
Yeah, this is a little bit different, but I just want to sort of bring together through a story. So I told you earlier, I'm judgmental. I also take a lot of self-defense classes. I was attacked when I was 15, walking to high school. And but it was really interesting. I was taking a self-defense class, and the guy leading it, he was a police officer, and it was a lot of cops in this class. And so he was asking, so what does your idea of a criminal look like? What does your idea of a perpetrator look like? What is your idea? And so he was going around the room, and I'm like sort of confused, like by the whole way that people are answering. But I'm like, okay, it must be based on their experience, obviously. So when they got, that's where it comes from, right? So a question like that. But when they got to me, I'm like, it's a big white guy in a suit. Literally everyone turned around and looked at me. And I'm like, that's who attacked me. Yeah. It was, and I wasn't expecting it. Because I wasn't expecting it, and because we have an idea of what someone looks like, whether it's a criminal or a perpetrator or the bad guy or the whoever in your life, I got attacked by someone who didn't look like that.
Right.
So it was a big wake-up call for me. Like when he asked that question, I'm like, why are they even thinking that? And to this day, I'm always looking behind me. But it's an interesting concept, isn't it? That they all had this idea, and for me, it's a big white guy in a suit.
Right. And what you see on television and the frequency with which you see people who commit crimes on television is doesn't match the facts.
Right.
And so media is shaping what you should think criminals look like.
Right.
Which is a whole nother story.
Which is sort of ridiculous, because that's why I got attacked, because I was thinking that's what they look like. Mm-hmm. They don't look like that guy, and I walked right by him.
Well, the media attempts to shape so much of what we think, and we have to be very careful about that, because the media is after clicks and advertising dollars.
Well, they want to trigger
whatever
fear.
They can sensationalize, they will, and we begin to think the sensationalism is normal when it's abnormal. Mm-hmm. Stay with us. When we come back, we're going to talk about such a practical topic. We're going to talk about how to kill Pastor Miles McPherson's ants, the automatic negative thoughts.
Oh, and I got
our
it.
conversation when I was at The Rock a few weeks ago. Stay with us. Welcome back. As I promised, we're going to kill Pastor Miles McPherson's ants.
Just make sure you throw the ants in there.
We love Pastor Miles, so we're going to help him.
We're going to get him an anteater.
Live in an ant-free zone. And he's the author of this new wonderful book, the third.
You can get it on Amazon, right?
You can get it on Amazon.
Any bookseller,
Pastor
really.
Miles McPherson or Miles McPherson.
At milesmcpherson.com.
At milesmcpherson.com. SDRock.
.com. Yep.
So when I was there, thank you for inviting me. I had so much fun.
Our church loved having you. They want you to come back.
Well, I would love that. that we talked about how to not believe every stupid thought you have. And we taught them a process of how to kill the ants, how not to believe everything you think. And the most powerful exercise we did is we actually started by working on your fears of writing the third option, because your ant, your automatic negative thought that tortured you for a long time, was this book is going to divide my church.
Yes. Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah, so racism is a volatile subject, and every time you bring it up, people just they get tense. So I started writing the book, and as I was writing it, people were saying to me, "Are you going to really write that? Are you going to write that?" You know, from both sides, from white and black. You can't, you know, you're not going to be able to write a good book because you're not going to be able to be honest enough for the whites. You're not going to be able to be. You're going to offend the whites. You're going to offend the blacks. And literally for a year on Sunday, I would sit there and look at my congregation and be full of fear.
That's fascinating.
Thinking this is going to divide the church because people don't want to hear it. People are closed. And I think the biggest aha for me in writing this book is learning how to, which I had great confidence I could do, but it took me a long time, to write about hard topics in a way that everyone could apply to themselves. While at the same time addressing the issues that people need to hear. But I've rewritten it. But a lot of times I was sitting there going, "What did I do? I made a big mistake. I shouldn't be writing this book. I should have just written a book about prayer, something real basic, you know." But when I got my literary agent, I said, "I don't want to write a book that pastors write about. I don't want to write just a regular book because I'm a pastor. I want to write something that's going to impact the culture." And this plopped in my lap. And so for a year, I had these negative thoughts of, and I would literally sit there and think, "Oh, I shouldn't write this sentence, this word."
Yeah, you were very cautious.
Oh, I was scared.
Yeah.
Because those words and phrases are still in the book, but I had to rewrite them in a way that people can get it. My brother was a professional boxer, and sometimes you can knock somebody out, but you keep hitting them so much they can't go down.
Oh, interesting.
So you gotta, if you knock them out, you have to give them room to fall.
Oh, that's so interesting.
And I had written a couple of drafts that were just pounding because I think I had more pain than I knew. And the people working with me were saying, "Why are you gonna, you know, that's a little harsh." But that wasn't my intent. So I had to soften it so people can read it, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, whoever, and go, "This makes sense for me. This is gonna help me get along." That was the goal, but there was a process where I didn't think I was doing that.
And so in front of the whole church, on several occasions,
you did not.
We went after that thought.
Oh, that's so fun.
You know, this book will divide the church.
Yes.
And then I asked him the questions
that
we
this is
teach
great.
you. Is it true?
Is it true? We are just now giving this book. We just gave last week a few copies. We got some early copies, and 98% of my fear is gone, but I'm like, I wonder what people are going to think as they start really reading it. So we went through, is it true? And no.
You can't know. It's true.
I'll really, really, really know. We have people read it, but I don't believe it's true now.
Right.
But if you would
I
ask,
have to give you another little piece of another one of
I
my
have to
little rules.
and I just throw one thing in. You're a man of God, right?
Yes.
So God inspires you to write.
Yeah.
So you're kind of
But
fighting
he's
with.
also a man.
I
Yeah,
know,
but I'm
right?
human.
But I'm just thinking, you know, I've had this thought for so long that
He's also a man. I want to give you this rule.
Yeah.
It's called the 18-40-60 rule. It says when you're 18, you worry about what everybody's thinking of you. And when you're 40, you don't give a damn what anybody thinks about you. And when you're 60, you realize no one has been thinking about you at all. People spend their days worrying and thinking about themselves, not you. So that has helped me immensely.
and I'm almost 60. I'm going really
wow,
close.
you've been taking good care
I'll
of
be
yourself.
60 in a year and a half. So
So the thought that tortured him, this
Right.
book is going to tear apart my church. Is that true? I don't know. Can you absolutely know that it's true with 100% certainty? The book will divide my church.
And that is absolutely no. I cannot know that 100%.
But how do you feel when you believe the thought this book is going to divide my church?
petrified. Failure, made a mistake, anxious, nervous, nothing good. It was paralyzing at times. Paralyzing. I mean, and it wasn't only on Sunday. It was just on Sunday that they were standing in front of me. It was all week. And it was a spiritual attack. Now, the reality is I could have written a book that would have divided my church. That's the reality. So it's not like it's out of nowhere. This is a very volatile topic and very sensitive topic, emotional topic. And I had friends telling me, white and black, you better not write that. And and if you write that, this is what it's going to do to my people, my clique, my in group. So I was getting that from both sides. But I had signed the contract.
But it also almost feels like ignoring the elephant in the room when you just say, okay, I'm not going to write it. There's an elephant in the room. Like someone's got to address it.
Yeah.
In a healthy way, right?
Correct. However, my goal and my calling in life is to share the gospel and bring people together. Right. And so if I, in an effort to bring people together, divide people, right, then I miss something somewhere.
Right. So getting rid of the ants does not mean we're not thoughtful.
Right.
Right? Who would you have been without the thought? Or how would you feel if you didn't have that thought? This book is going to divide my church.
Oh, but getting back to the answer. I'll say this. There's two sides to that. Without the thought, I am so empowered and encouraged. But as you very wisely said, because this is what you do, a little bit of anxiety is good. And so in the process of writing it, I'm a fairly intelligent guy. I'm listening to what people are saying, going, that makes sense. How can I rewrite that then differently? I love that.
That's smart.
And that's what I had to go through is we sent it to the publisher, and for different reasons, she sent it back for different reasons, not that it was offensive, but just grammatical stuff. And I had another person come help me rewrite the whole thing. And when that person came and said, this is not Pastor Miles that I know. And she helped me rewrite the whole thing with the tone that I really always wanted. I just didn't know that I didn't have that tone.
Right.
Because, I'm not the writer. I'm more of the idea guy. And I'm from New York. We're blunt, so being blunt is kind of normal.
I should have been from New York.
You know what I'm saying? Right. And so, so that anxiety, it worked to my advantage. However, it tortured me. But without it now, I am so encouraged. And I think, one of the things you said in our lunch was, when you get rid of those ants, you're able to fulfill what God's called you. And I cannot tell you since 2 weeks ago how I have changed. And think about that every day. I am so much more encouraged. It's almost like someone took the lid off of my life. And I now can say, I can do so much more now without the fear of these ants. And again, I'm continually getting rid of them. But without anxiety and fear and these negative thoughts, there's so much more encouraged to go do and say what God's called me to do and say.
So without the thought, you're still thoughtful.
Yes.
But you're powerful.
Powerful.
And you're not suffering. You can take that energy that's going into anxiety and suffering and turn it into motivation to live your purpose, right? Because without doing this book, if you would have let the thoughts control you, you would have actually decreased your level of purpose on the planet. So what's the opposite of this book will divide us?
Not only is this book going to change and unify our church, again, in our church, when I tell people, find someone who doesn't look like you, all they have to do is do this.
Right.
They're not looking around the room. Boom, because that's how it's going to make us even stronger. But it's also going to help churches and the culture as a whole in the nation. That's what I believe.
I really like that.
And so my opposite is going to change. It's going to change America. If it goes around the world, great. But I like the United States of America, so this is my home.
I was actually, it was a while ago, I was saying this to you, because I'm watching on television all of these problems between the neighborhoods with police officers. It feels to me like the racial division is just terrible right now. And I was actually saying, we need someone to come forward that has a positive message that can somehow bring this back together. And I mean, it's going to take someone really special, right, with a special message. And we haven't had that for a long time.
Well, and the third option.
I'm really hoping
does
that that's.
But these ants that were bothering you for the book, they've been attacking you for a long time, haven't they?
Yeah, yes, the fear of rejection. I know you said I'm a man of God, but as you said, we're a human. And I think one of the burdens pastors have, which I don't know that I have this burden, is having to look like I'm perfect. Because I talk about my sins all the time. Right? Hey, I did cocaine. My wife and I were a mess because I was a mess before we got married. But yeah, you grow up with fear of rejection, especially when I was growing up. I was rejected in both my neighborhoods.
Right.
And I never had to process that and what that really meant, what that really means to me today. And so, absolutely, the fear of being rejected, the fear of being embarrassed on television, and being shamed, and not doing well. I mean, I grew up achieving. Football was ever since 10 years old. I achieved. I was, you have to be good. You get a trophy at the end of the year, and they had the participants trophy. We didn't have that.
Right.
This was the participants trophy. Thanks for coming.
Right.
But so absolutely, those ants have bothered me all my life.
And it's true for most people. And what I love
all people don't have ants.
I think all people.
Okay.
Well, no, sociopaths actually don't. They don't have
need more
anxiety.
Okay.
So some anxiety is good. People have low levels of anxiety, they go to jail.
Right.
Because they don't have enough anxiety to go, don't do that.
Right.
That's stupid. But most of us have ants. But what I love about my NFL players and the professional athletes I treat is they're used to being coached. And so when I ask them to do something,
They do it.
They do it.
Like with intensity.
And so what have you done with the ants since we
Oh, let me tell you. I have my book right here. I have a
that's
book.
great.
Can I get it?
Yeah.
Okay, I got to show you. It's in my other bag. I have a little notebook. I have these. People always give me these little journals, and I have this little journal. It's my ant journal, and almost every day, I write ANTS, automatic negative thoughts, and then I go through the 6 questions. What's
That's
the
awesome.
thought? I write it out. Is it true? Is it 100%? Can I know for 100%? I write the verses out. How does it make me feel? How would I feel without it? And I do the opposite. And I could tell you said to do 100 of them. So my goal is to do 100 up until when the book launches. This book launches September 11th. Get it on Amazon. But to do 100 by then to totally rewire my brain. I like science, and
I like
so
that.
I like the rewiring. I get all
It's
that.
fantastic.
So I just write stuff down. I try to think of a negative thought because a lot of them are gone. A lot of ants have been killed, and so I know there's a couple of them hiding in the corner somewhere. So I try to spray the water.
Yeah, they're
in there.
little like cockroaches. They just somehow they keep popping
come out
up.
and
So
they
you just
have
have to be
babies.
aware of them, right?
You have babies, and
it's okay as long as you know and you've got
as long as I
a
know.
solution.
And I talk about it since you were there three Sundays ago. I talk about it at church again this past Sunday, and people love the ants. They love the 6 steps. They love it. It's changed their life. I probably got more positive comments from this series on the brain called Mind Your Business that I just finished than any other series, and you were a big part of that. They loved it.
That's fantastic.
So you don't have to suffer. You don't have to allow the automatic negative thoughts to steal your happiness. But you have to develop a discipline
Absolutely.
around them. Whenever you feel sad, whenever you feel mad, whenever you feel nervous or out of control, write down what you think and then ask yourself, is it true? Stay with us. Use the code podcast10 to get a 10% discount on a full evaluation at amenclinics.com or on our supplements at brainmdhealth.com. Thank you for listening to the Brain Warriors Way podcast. Go to iTunes and leave a review, and you'll automatically be entered into a drawing to get a free signed copy of the Brain Warriors Way and the Brain Warriors Way cookbook we give away every month.